Kiss me. Now. Or we both die." Adrian Moretti didn't ask. He grabbed the terrified nurse by the wrist, yanked her into the dark, and crushed his mouth against hers as 3 gunmen rounded the corner. She tasted blood on his lips. His blood. Her heart slammed against her ribs. And when the killers finally passed, when he finally let her go, the most feared mafia boss in Chicago stared at her like he'd seen a ghost, because in his world, a kiss like that meant she now belonged to him. If you love stories where the coldest man alive falls for the one woman who was never afraid of him, subscribe. Now stay with me to the very end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels tonight. The gunshot came before the scream. Elena Marquez had heard a lot of terrible sounds in her 26 years. The flatline of a monitor. The last breath of a stranger. The sound her father's chair made the night he walked out and never came back. But she had never heard a gunshot this close. Close enough to feel it in her teeth. She froze in the alley behind Cook County General, her keys still in her hand, her nurse's badge still clipped to her scrub top, and for one endless second, her body forgot how to move. "Get down." The voice didn't belong to her. A man's voice, low sharp, the kind of voice used to being obeyed. And then a hand closed around her wrist and pulled, and Elena's whole world tipped sideways into the dark. "Let go of me," she gasped. "Let go. I don't have anything, I don't have money." "Quiet." His grip tightened. "If you scream, you're dead. If they find you here, you're dead. Do you understand me?" I'm beyond dead. She didn't understand anything. She understood only that she'd worked a 16-hour shift, that her feet were bleeding inside her cheap shoes, that she'd stayed late to hold the hand of a man who died anyway, and that now some stranger was dragging her deeper into an alley she should have avoided. "Please," she whispered. "I'm a nurse. I just want to go home." He stopped. In the thin light bleeding down from a broken street lamp, she saw his face for the first time. Hard jaw, dark eyes. A suit that probably cost more than she made in a year, now torn at the shoulder and darkening with something wet. "You're bleeding," she said. It was reflex. It was the only thing in the world she knew how to do. She reached for his shoulder without thinking, and he caught her hand in midair. "Don't," he said. "You're hurt. That's a lot of blood. If it's the brachial artery." "Quiet," he said again, but softer now, and his eyes flicked past her toward the mouth of the alley. Footsteps. 2, maybe 3 men. The scrape of a shoe on wet asphalt. A voice she'd never forget. "He came this way. Spread out. Boss wants him breathing so he can watch." Elena felt the blood drain out of her own face. The wounded man pressed himself against the brick and pulled her with him, his good arm around her waist, holding her still. She could feel his heart. It was steady. Impossibly, insanely steady, as if a man being hunted through the dark was nothing new to him at all. "They'll check the alley," he breathed against her ear. "When they do, you follow my lead. Not one word. If you fight me, they'll see us both." "Follow your lead? I don't even know who you—" "You're about to be someone I'd kill for," he said. "So they'll think twice about killing you. Now stop talking." She didn't have time to ask what that meant, because the footsteps turned the corner, and Adrian Moretti kissed her. It happened so fast, she couldn't have stopped it. 1 second she was pressed against cold brick, and the next his mouth was on hers. His hand curved around the back of her neck, tilting her head, hiding her face against his. To anyone glancing down that alley, they were nothing but 2 lovers tangled in a doorway. Nothing worth a bullet, nothing worth a second look. The kiss tasted like copper and rain. Her mind screamed at her to shove him away. Her body, trembling, terrified, did the opposite. It went still because his arm was the only thing holding her up. The footsteps slowed. "Nothing back here," one of the men grunted. "Just a couple hiding from the rain." Boss said, "Find Moretti. That ain't Moretti back there sucking face. Come on." The footsteps moved away, and still he didn't let her go. Only when the alley was silent again, only when the last echo of the killers faded into the storm, did Adrian Moretti finally lift his mouth from hers. Elena stumbled back and hit the wall. Her hand flew up to her lips. "You—" She couldn't get the words out. What did you?" "I just saved your life," he said flatly. "You kissed me." "I did what I had to do." He was already turning away, one hand clamped over his shoulder, his breath coming shorter now that the danger had passed. "You should thank me. You're breathing. Not everyone I meet gets to say that." Thank you. Something snapped loose in her chest. 16 hours of exhaustion, months of fear, a lifetime of being pushed around by men who thought her silence was consent. "You dragged me into an alley. You put your hands on me. You used me like a prop, and I'm supposed to thank you." He turned back, slowly, and for the first time, something like surprise moved behind his eyes. Nobody talked to Adrian Moretti like that. Nobody. "You have no idea who I am," he said quietly. "No, and I don't care." She pushed off the wall, wobbling, furious, alive. "You're bleeding out. That's the only thing about you that interests me. Sit down before you pass out and crack your head open because I'm not carrying you." He stared at her. And then, because his knees were already going, because the blood loss had finally caught up with him. Adrian Moretti, the man 3 killers had hunted through the rain, sat down on a filthy stoop in an alley behind a public hospital and let a poor nurse he'd never met press her hands to his wound. "It's not the artery," she muttered, working fast, tearing his ruined shirt into strips. "You're lucky. 2 inches over and you'd already be gone. Hold this. Press hard. Harder. I don't care if it hurts. I care if you die on my hands because I have had enough people die on my hands today. You always this angry. You always this quiet when someone's saving your life." A sound came out of him. It took her a second to realize it was almost a laugh. Rusty, disbelieving, like a machine turning over after years of sitting still. "What's your name?" he asked. "Why, so you can send someone to my apartment. So I know who to thank." She hesitated. Every instinct told her to lie. But she was too tired to be clever. "Elena?" "Elena." He said it like he was tasting it. "Elena what?" "Elena, none of your business. Keep pressing." He watched her work. In all his years, in all the rooms full of men who bowed when he entered and all the beautiful women who had smiled at him because they wanted something, no one had ever looked at him the way this woman did, not with fear, not with hunger, but with plain, stubborn, exhausted care. As if his life mattered simply because it was a life. As if she'd do the exact same thing for a stranger in the next alley. "You should be running," he said. "I know. Most people would have run. Most people didn't spend the last 16 hours watching a man beg them not to let him die." Her hands were shaking now, and she hated it. "I couldn't save him. His family didn't have insurance. They wheeled him to a different hospital, and by the time they got there—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "You want me to run, fine, but you'll be dead by morning, and I'll have watched 2 people die tonight instead of 1. So no, I'm not running." Adrian Moretti said nothing. He was a man who read people for a living, who could look at an enemy across a table and know exactly how much fear he could squeeze from him. And he looked at this woman, this nobody, this bleeding-hearted nurse in cheap shoes, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, he could not read her at all. That, more than the wound, more than the killers, more than the rain, was the thing that changed everything. "There," she said finally, tying off the last strip of cloth. "That'll hold until you get real help. You do have real help, don't you? Somebody who can stitch you up who isn't standing in a dark alley." "I have people. Of course you do." She sat back on her heels and really looked at him. Then the suit, the watch, the cold certainty in his voice. And something cold slid down her own spine. What kind of people hunt a man through the rain with guns, and what kind of man has people to fix him up after? He met her eyes. He could have lied. He was good at lying. Instead he said, "The kind you should stay far away from." For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Elena stood up, wiped his blood off her hands onto her scrub pants and said, "Then this is where we say goodbye." Elena, whatever that kiss meant to you, it meant nothing to me. You needed a place to hide. I was there, that's all. You don't owe me anything, and I don't want anything from you. She backed toward the mouth of the alley, keys clenched in her fist like a weapon. "Get somewhere safe. Change that dressing in 12 hours, and don't ever come near me again." She walked away. And Adrian Moretti, who had ordered men killed for less than turning their back on him, sat in the rain and watched her go and did nothing to stop her. He didn't even know her last name. He would spend the next 3 days learning to regret that. By the time Adrian's car found him, the bleeding had slowed and the rain had stopped. Marco was behind the wheel. Marco, who had been at his side for 15 years, who had pulled Adrian out of more graves than either of them cared to count. Marco took one look at the crude bandage on his boss's shoulder, and his jaw tightened. "Who did this?" "Get in the car." "Boss, who dressed the wound?" "Drive Marco." They drove. The city slid by wet and gleaming, and full of people who had no idea that the man in the back seat could end their lives with a phone call. Adrian stared out the window and did something he never did. He thought about a woman. "There was a nurse," he said finally. Marco's eyes flicked up to the mirror. "A nurse. She was in the alley. When Rossi's men came through, He stopped. He didn't want to say it. He didn't know why. "She kept me from bleeding out." "You want me to find her? Make sure she keeps her mouth shut." "No." "Boss, if she saw your face?" "I said no." The words came out harder than he meant them to, and Marco went quiet. Adrian pressed his hand against the bandage she'd tied. It was neat, careful, the work of someone who'd done it 1,000 times and still gave a damn. "Leave her alone." But even as he said it, he knew. He wasn't going to leave her alone. He couldn't. The thing about Adrian Moretti was that he'd stopped feeling things a long time ago. There was a before and an after in his life, and the line between them was the day his younger brother Danny died. Danny, 17. Funny, soft-hearted, the only person Adrian had ever loved without conditions. Danny had gotten sick, and the sickness was the kind money could have fixed, except back then the Morettis hadn't had money. They'd had a broken-down apartment on the west side, and a mother who cleaned houses, and a father who was already gone. Adrian had carried his brother into 3 different hospitals that night. 3. And at every one someone in a clean uniform had looked at their clothes, looked at the empty space where an insurance card should be, and turned them away. By the time anyone agreed to help, it was too late. Danny died in a hallway, and 19-year-old Adrian Moretti made himself a promise over his brother's body. He would never be powerless again. He would never again stand in a hallway and beg. He would build something so large, so feared, so untouchable, that no door in this city would ever close in his face. He'd kept that promise. He'd built an empire out of it. And somewhere along the way, the boy who'd carried his dying brother through the rain had disappeared, and in his place stood a man who felt nothing, wanted nothing, and trusted no one. Until a nurse in cheap shoes had pressed her hands to his wound and yelled at him for scaring her. Until a woman who owed him nothing had refused to run. Adrian lay awake that night. The doctor his men brought had restitched the shoulder, praising whoever had done the first dressing, and he stared at the ceiling of a mansion that had everything and nothing, and he heard her voice in the dark. "I didn't save a mafia boss. I know." She hadn't said that, not yet. She'd said something else. "You'll be dead by morning, and I'll have watched 2 people die instead of 1. He'd built his whole life so that no one would ever be able to hurt him again. And a stranger had walked into an alley and hurt him anyway, without lifting a finger, just by being kind to him. "Marco," he said the next morning over coffee he didn't drink. "Boss?" "Find the nurse." Marco set down the pot. "You told me to leave her alone. I changed my mind." "You don't change your mind." Adrian looked up, and Marco, who had seen his boss stare down men twice his size without blinking, saw something in those dark eyes he had never seen before. Not anger, not calculation. Something that almost looked like fear. "Find her." Adrian said again. Cook County General, Emergency Department. First name Elena. That's all I have. That's not much. It's enough. Find her. But Marco... He stood, and the whole room seemed to tilt toward him the way rooms always did. You don't touch her. You don't scare her. You don't so much as look at her the wrong way. You find out where she is, and you come back to me. Do you understand? Boss, with respect, you've got Rossi's whole family looking to put you in the ground. You've got the shipment problem. You've got the meeting Thursday. And you want to spend resources chasing down a nurse who patched a hole in your shoulder. Adrian was already walking toward the door. Yes, he said. I do, Oshidung. Elena, meanwhile, was trying very hard to pretend the whole thing had never happened. She'd scrubbed her lips raw that night, standing at the cracked mirror in her bathroom, as if she could scrub the memory off along with the taste of his blood. She'd told herself it was nothing. A frightened man had used her as a shield, and she'd been unlucky enough to be there. That was all. In a city like Chicago, alleys like that one swallowed people every night. She'd survived. She should be grateful and forget it. She could not forget it. You're doing it again, said Rosa, her closest friend, and the only nurse in the department who'd been there longer than Elena. Doing what? Staring at nothing. That's the third time today. You gonna tell me what happened, or do I have to guess? Nothing happened. Rosa handed her a chart. Bed 6 chest pain, probably anxiety, but run the panel anyway. And Elena, nothing my whole foot. You've got a look on your face like you saw God. Not God, Elena thought. The devil, more likely. She threw herself into the work because the work was the one thing she'd always been able to count on. Bed 6, bed 7. A kid with a broken arm, a old man with pneumonia, and no one to call a woman clutching her stomach, who'd been waiting 6 hours because the ER was full and understaffed and nobody upstairs cared. Elena cared. That was the trouble with her. She'd always cared too much, and it had never once done her any good. It was near the end of her shift, near midnight, near the exact hour it had all happened, when she felt it. Someone watching her. She looked up from the nurse's station, and across the crowded waiting room, a man in a dark coat lowered his newspaper just enough to meet her eyes. Elena's blood went cold. Not him. Not the man from the alley. This was someone else, older, heavy-set, a scar through one eyebrow. But he was looking at her the way a wolf looks at a deer that hasn't started running yet. She looked back down at her charts. Counted to 10. Looked up again. He was gone. Rosa, she said, and her voice came out thin. That man who was sitting by the door. Coat scar over his eye. Did you see where he went? What man? He was right there, reading a newspaper. Rosa scanned the room. Honey, there's nobody by the door but the drunk guy and the lady with the twins. You feeling okay? You're white as a sheet. Elena wasn't feeling okay, because she understood all at once and far too late what the man in the alley had meant. You're about to be someone I'd kill for, so they'll think twice about killing you. She thought it was just words, just a trick to fool the men chasing him. But in a world she didn't understand, ruled by men she'd never met, that kiss had said something out loud. It had marked her. And now people were watching her, his people, or worse, his enemies. And she had walked out of that alley thinking she'd escaped, when the truth was, she'd never been in more danger in her life. She clocked out early. She took a different route home, changing buses twice, checking over her shoulder at every stop. When she finally reached her building, she stood across the street for 10 full minutes, watching the windows, watching the dark before she made herself go inside. Her apartment was exactly as she'd left it. Small, cold, safe. She locked the door, chained it, pushed a chair under the knob for good measure, and felt ridiculous doing it and did it anyway. Then she sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and let herself shake. It's fine, she whispered to the empty room. You're fine. He said don't come near me again. He's not going to come near you. It's over. There was a knock at the door. Elena's heart stopped. She didn't move, didn't breathe. Told herself it was a neighbor, the landlord, anyone. The knock came again. Soft. Patient. 3 knocks evenly spaced the knock of a man who had all the time in the world. "Elena." His voice low through the cheap wood. "It's me. From the alley. I'm alone. I'm not going to hurt you." She stood frozen in the middle of her own home. "How?" Her voice broke. She tried again. "How did you find me? I never told you where I know. I'm sorry. Open the door." "No." "Elena. You said don't come near me. You said—" Anger was rising up through the fear now hot and welcome. "I did what you wanted. I forgot the whole thing. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't go to the police. I just wanted my life back. And now you're at my door in the middle of the night. How did you even find my apartment? Are you following me? Do you know how insane this is?" A pause. "Yes," he said quietly. "I know exactly how insane this is. I've been asking myself the same question for 3 days." She put her hand on the chain. Didn't undo it. "There was a man at the hospital tonight," she said, "watching me. Scar over his eye." The silence on the other side of the door changed, went sharp. "Describe him," Adrian said. "Every detail, now. Heavy set, older, dark coat. He was reading a newspaper and looking at me like I was already dead." Her voice cracked on the last word. "That's your fault, isn't it? Whatever you did in that alley, whatever that kiss meant. You put a target on me, and then you left, and now they know where I work, and it's only a matter of time before they know where I live. Elena, open the door, please." She didn't know why she did it. Later, she would tell herself it was fear that she'd rather have the devil she'd met than the one with the scar. But that wasn't the whole truth. The whole truth was that something in his voice, that low, careful pleas from a man she was certain had never said the word in his life, reached past all her good sense and turned the lock. She undid the chain. She opened the door. Adrian Moretti stood in the dim hallway, and he looked nothing like the bleeding wreck she'd left in the alley. The suit was flawless again. The face was calm. But his eyes went over her from head to toe, checking. She realized that she was unhurt, and there was nothing calm in them at all. "The man with the scar," he said, "is named Bruno Rossi. He works for the family that tried to kill me the other night. And if he was watching you, it means they saw us. It means they think you're mine." He stepped inside without being asked and shut the door and threw the chain like it was his own home. "Which means right now you are the least safe person in the city of Chicago." Elena backed away from him until her legs hit the bed. "Then you fix it," she said. "You did this. You fix it. Tell them it wasn't real. Tell them I'm nobody. I'm nothing. I just happened to be there." "It doesn't work like that." "Then make it work like that. I don't want your world. I never asked for any of this. I have a job. I have patients who need me. I have a life." "You had a life," Adrian said, and the flatness of it stopped her cold. "Elena, look at me. I am not here to frighten you. I'm here because 3 days ago you put your hands on a stranger's wound instead of running, and it's the only decent thing anyone's done for me in more years than I can count, and I will be damned before I let you die for it." The room went very quiet. "Die," Elena repeated. "That's what they do to the people I care about." Something moved across his face, old and raw and quickly buried. "That's why I don't care about anyone. It's safer. For them. And now, because of me, because of one stupid decision I made to keep myself alive, you're on a list you can never get off of. And I am so sorry. But I'm not going to leave you to face it alone." Elena sat down hard on the edge of the bed. Everything she'd built, the careful, quiet, invisible life she'd survived on since she was 17, was gone. She could feel it going. And she understood in that terrible moment that the man standing in her tiny apartment was telling her the truth. "I don't even know your name," she whispered. He looked at her for a long moment. "Adrian," he said. "Adrian Moretti." The name meant nothing to her. She wasn't the kind of person who read about men like him, but she watched the way he said it, braced almost as if waiting to see the fear bloom in her face the way it did in everyone else's. It didn't. She was too tired and too angry and too far past fear to give him the satisfaction. "Well, Adrian Moretti," she said, and her voice shook only a little. "You've ruined my life, so you'd better have a plan for what happens next." And for the second time since he'd met her, the most feared man in Chicago felt his mouth twitch toward something he hadn't done in years. "I do," he said. "You're not going to like it." "I already don't like any of this. You're going to like this part less." He crossed to the window, checked the street below without seeming to, and let the curtain fall. "You can't stay here. Not tonight, not tomorrow. Rossi knows where you work, and it's a matter of hours before he knows where you sleep. So you have two choices. You can run, change your name, leave the city, disappear, and spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder and hoping they never find you, alone. Or," he turned to face her, "or you come with me, to my house, where nobody, not Rossi, not anyone can touch you, where you'll be safe until I make this go away." Elena laughed. It came out cracked and disbelieving. "You want me to move into a Mafia boss's house? I want you to survive the week. With the man who put me in danger in the first place. With the only man in this city who can get you out of it." She stared at him, at the impossible, insane, terrifying choice he'd laid at her feet. Run and be alone and afraid forever. She knew how that felt. She'd been alone since she was a girl. Or walk straight into the lion's mouth and trust that the lion, for reasons she couldn't understand, had decided not to eat her. "Why?" she said finally. "Just tell me why. Men like you don't do things for free. What do you want from me?" Adrian Moretti was quiet for a long moment, and when he answered, it was not the answer either of them expected. "I don't know," he said. It was the truest thing he'd said all night, and it frightened him more than any of Rossi's guns. "I don't know what I want," he said again slower, like a man discovering the words as he spoke them. "I've spent 3 days trying to figure out why I can't stop thinking about a nurse whose last name I don't know. I've got a war coming. I've got 100 things that should matter more, and instead, I sent my best man to find you, and I came here myself, and I stood outside your door for 10 minutes before I could make myself knock, because I was afraid you'd already be gone." He shook his head, almost angry at himself. "I don't want anything from you, Elena. That's the problem. I've wanted things from every person I've ever met. You're the first one I just didn't want to see get hurt." Silence. Elena looked at this dangerous, guarded, damaged man standing in the wreckage of her ordinary life, and she felt something she had absolutely no business feeling. She felt sorry for him. "Okay," she heard herself say. Adrian went still. "Okay, I'll come." She stood up before she could change her mind, grabbing a bag from the closet, throwing in the few things that mattered: a photo of her mother, her badge, the little box of savings she kept taped under a drawer. "Not because I trust you, I don't. Not because I forgive you, because I don't do that either. But because you're right, and I hate that you're right, and I'm not going to sit here and wait for a man with a scar to knock on my door." She zipped the bag, turned to face him. "But understand something, Adrian Moretti. I am not yours. That kiss didn't make me anything. I'm coming with you because it keeps me alive, and the second it's safe, I'm gone, and you will never see me again. Are we clear?" He looked at her, this small, furious, unbreakable woman who had just agreed to walk into the most dangerous house in Chicago and set his own rules on the way in. "Crystal," he said, and somewhere deep in the cold place where his heart used to be, something that had been frozen for 19 years, cracked very quietly straight down the middle. The car was already waiting when they came down. Marco held the door, and his eyes went from Adrian to the woman beside him to the bag on her shoulder, and Elena watched the man do the math and come up with an answer that clearly troubled him. "Boss," Marco said carefully. "This is Elena," Adrian said. "She's under my protection. That means she's under yours. Anyone who touches her answers to me. Is that understood, and will you make sure every man who works for me understands it by morning?" Marco held his gaze a beat longer than a man like Marco usually dared. Then he nodded once. "Understood." Elena slid into the back seat of a car that smelled like leather and money, into a night that was carrying her further and further from the small, safe life she'd fought so hard to keep, and she pressed the photo of her mother against her chest and tried not to cry. Adrian got in beside her, not too close, careful even now of the space between them. "Whatever you're feeling," he said quietly, watching the city slide past the window. "You're allowed to feel it. You didn't ask for this, none of it. I know that." "Don't be kind to me," Elena said, her voice thick. "I can handle you being a monster. I don't know what to do with you being kind." He didn't answer, but she saw his jaw tighten, saw his hand curl into a fist on his knee, and she understood that she'd said something that landed somewhere deep, somewhere she couldn't see. They drove north out of the world she knew and into his. And neither of them said the thing they were both thinking, that a kiss in a dark alley was never supposed to mean anything, and that already somehow it had come to mean everything. Neither of them said it. But Adrian Moretti, watching the reflection of a poor nurse in the glass of his bulletproof window, thought of his brother dying in a hallway, because no one with power had cared enough to help. And Elena Marquez, holding the last photo of the mother she'd lost, thought of a wounded man who'd told his most trusted killer, "Anyone who touches her answers to me," as if she were something precious, as if she were worth protecting. Two broken people, one impossible night, and a scarred man named Bruno Rossi, standing in the shadows across from an empty apartment, reaching into his coat for a phone to tell his boss exactly where the Mafia king had hidden his new weakness, because Victoria Romano had been waiting a very long time for Adrian Moretti to finally love someone. Now at last he had, and she intended to take that love and use it and burn his whole world to the ground with it. The house swallowed them whole. Elena had expected a mansion, and it was a mansion, but that word didn't cover the silence of it. The kind of silence that money buys, and then can't fill. She stood in a hallway wide enough to drive a car through, still clutching her bag, still clutching the photo of her mother. And she thought, "This is a tomb with a chandelier. You'll have the room at the end of the east wing," Adrian said, already handing her bag to a woman who'd appeared out of nowhere. "Sophia will bring you anything you need. There are locks on the inside of your door. Use them if it makes you feel safer. Nobody in this house will come near you without my word, but I won't insult you by pretending that means you have to trust me." "How generous," Elena said. "It isn't. It's the least I can do, and both of us know it." She wanted to keep hating him. It would have been so much easier to keep hating him. But the man kept doing this, kept saying the exact thing that made the hate slip through her fingers. "Adrian." She stopped him before he could turn away. "That man tonight, Rossi. If he saw us in the alley, and he had time to watch me at the hospital for who knows how long, he already knows what I look like. He already knows where I work. Moving me here doesn't erase any of that." "No," Adrian said. "It doesn't." "Then what's the plan? You said you had a plan." "The plan is to make Rossi's family believe hurting you costs more than it's worth." He met her eyes. "The plan is to make them afraid of me again. And if they're not—" For a moment he said nothing. "Then I deal with it," he said, "the way I deal with everything." And something in the flatness of it told her exactly what dealing with it meant, and she felt the floor tilt under her. She'd stitched a wound in that alley thinking she was saving a stranger. She was starting to understand she'd saved a man who ended lives the way she ended shifts, routinely, professionally, without losing sleep. She should have been terrified. She was terrified. But she was also, God help her, still standing there talking to him. Sophia showed her to the room, and it was beautiful, and Elena hated how beautiful it was. She locked the door the way he'd told her she could. Then she sat on the edge of a bed bigger than her whole apartment, and she called Rosa because she needed to hear one voice from her real life, one voice from the world she'd left behind 3 hours ago. "Elena, where are you? You left in the middle of your shift, girl," Dr. Reyes was asking. "Rosa, listen to me. I need you to do something, and I need you not to ask questions." A pause. Rosa had known her 11 years. "What kind of something?" If anyone comes to the hospital asking about me, anyone, a man, a woman, someone who says they're a cousin, a lawyer, anything, you don't know where I am. You don't have my number. I quit. I moved. You don't know where. Can you do that?" "Elena?" Rosa's voice dropped. "What did you do?" "I didn't do anything. I was just in the wrong place." Her throat closed. "Please, just if anyone asks, you don't know me. Promise me." "I promise." "But Elena, you call me every day. You hear me? You call me every single day, so I know you're breathing, or so help me. I will send the whole department out looking for you." "Every day," Elena whispered. "I promise." She hung up before Rosa could hear her cry. Adrian did not sleep. He sat in his study with a glass of whiskey he didn't drink and a folder Marco had put in front of him, and he stared at a photograph of a man with a scar over one eyebrow. "Bruno Rossi," Marco said. "Enforcer. Been with the Rossi family since before the old man died. But here's the thing, boss. The Rossis don't have the muscle for what happened in that alley. 3 shooters coordinated boxing you in. That's not Rossi money. Somebody paid for that. Somebody's backing them." Adrian already knew. He'd known the second the first bullet found his shoulder. Because there was only one person in this city with the patience to spend a year setting a trap, the resources to fund a war she'd fight through other people's hands, and the personal hatred to want him not just dead, but broken first. "Victoria," he said. Marco went quiet. "Boss, we don't know that. We know it." Adrian turned the whiskey glass in his fingers. "Rossi's a weapon. Somebody's aiming him. And there's only one person who's been waiting 15 years to put a bullet in me and call it justice." He set the glass down. "Find out if she's back in the city, and find out how Rossi found the hospital. He didn't follow me there. I was careful. Someone told him where to look." "You think we've got a leak?" "I think," Adrian said slowly, "that a woman I kissed in an alley by accident got watched at her workplace within 2 days, and that shouldn't have been possible. So yes, Marco, I think we've got a leak, and I think somebody in this house or close to it is feeding my life to the people trying to end it." Marco's jaw tightened. "I'll look into it." Quietly. Always. But even as Marco left, Adrian's mind wasn't on the leak or Rossi or Victoria Romano and her 15-year grudge. It was on a woman locked in a room at the end of the East Wing who had called him a monster, and then agreed to sleep under his roof anyway. He'd told her the truth tonight. He didn't know what he wanted from her. That had never happened to him before, wanting something and not knowing what it was. It sat in his chest like a stone. He finished the whiskey he hadn't meant to drink, and for the first time in 19 years, Adrian Moretti did not know what he was doing. Morning came, and with it, a new war. Elena woke to sunlight and confusion, and for one blessed second forgot where she was. Then it all came back: the alley, the kiss, the man at her door, the drive north, and she pressed her face into a pillow that cost more than her rent, and let herself feel it all just for a minute. Then she got up, because that was what she did. She got up. She kept going. She'd been doing it since she was 17. She found the kitchen by following the smell of coffee, and she found Adrian already there. Jacket off, sleeve rolled up, and she saw the bandage on his shoulder was seeping. Nurse instinct killed every other feeling in her body. "You changed it wrong?" she said, crossing the room before she thought better of it. "Sit down. Where are your supplies?" "Elena." "Sit down, Adrian." She was already pulling the collar of his shirt aside. "You've pulled a stitch. If this gets infected, you'll be dead of sepsis in a week, and all your guns won't do a thing about it. Where are your supplies?" He looked at her for a long moment. Then quietly, "Sophia, bring the kit from the 3rd floor." Elena worked in silence, her hands sure, and she felt him watching her the whole time, and she hated how aware she was of him, the warmth of his skin, the old scars she found under the fresh wound, the way he didn't flinch even when she knew it hurt. "You've been shot before," she said. Not a question. The scars told the story. "Twice. Stabbed 3 times. Broke this arm when I was 22. He said it the way another man might list old jobs. You learn to stop flinching. Flinching tells people where it hurts. That's a terrible way to live. It kept me alive. Being alive isn't the same as living." She taped the fresh dressing down harder than she needed to. "There. Don't move it for 6 hours. And drink water, you're dehydrated, your skin's like paper." He caught her wrist as she pulled back. Not hard, just enough to stop her. "Thank you," he said. And there it was again, that voice, that word he had no business knowing how to say. She pulled her wrist free, because if she let him hold it one more second, she was going to do something stupid. "Don't thank me. It's a reflex. I'd do it for anyone." She turned away, busying her hands with the supplies. "That's the whole problem with me, if you ask my ex-boyfriends. I'd do it for anyone. Then the men in your life were fools." She froze. She didn't turn around. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't do that." "Do what?" "Say things like that. Like you see me." Her voice cracked and she hated it. "You don't get to see me, Adrian. You don't get to be dangerous and cold and terrifying, and then say things that make me feel like a person. Pick one. I can survive one. I can't survive both." The silence behind her stretched so long she finally turned around. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't read. And when he spoke, it was slow, careful, like a man walking across ice. "For 19 years, he said, I've made sure nobody saw me, not the real thing. It's safer that way. You show a man your throat, he cuts it." He stood, and the kitchen felt suddenly very small. "But you saw me in that alley before I could stop you. You saw a bleeding man, not a boss, and you put your hands on him anyway. So it's a little late for both of us to pretend we can't see each other, isn't it?" Elena's heart was pounding. "I'm going to make this go away," he said before she could answer. "Rossi, the danger, all of it. And when it's over, you'll be free to walk out that door and I won't stop you. That's a promise. But until then..." He paused, and something almost gentle crossed his face. "Until then, you're not my prisoner, Elena. You're my guest. And you don't have to keep bracing yourself for me to become the monster you're afraid of. And if you do, then you'll have every right to run." He left the kitchen before she could answer, and Elena stood alone in a beautiful room, in a house full of dangerous men, pressing her hand to her own chest, trying to convince her heart to slow down. It wouldn't. Beyond. The days that followed rearranged everything Elena thought she knew. She'd walked into that house certain she understood exactly what Adrian Moretti was. A criminal. A killer. A man who moved through the world taking what he wanted. And all of that was true. She watched men come to that house pale and leave paler. She heard the low, controlled anger in his voice through closed doors. She saw Marco return one evening with blood on his knuckles that wasn't his, and she saw Adrian nod like a man approving a job well done, and she felt sick. But she saw other things too. She saw him send Sophia home early every Friday, because Sophia had a granddaughter, and Friday was the day she visited. She saw him leave an envelope of cash on the counter for the young man who tended the grounds, and heard him say gruffly, "For your sister's medicine, and if you thank me, I'll take it back." She saw him stand at a window at 3 in the morning, when he thought no one was watching, staring at nothing, looking so alone that it made her chest ache. And she started to understand that Adrian Moretti was not one thing. He was a monster who left money for medicine. He was a killer who couldn't sleep. He was a man who'd built a fortress around a wound so old it had scarred over, and he'd forgotten there was still a boy in there bleeding. "You keep looking at me like that," he said one evening, catching her watching him across the long table where they'd taken to eating dinner in tense, careful silence. "Like what? Like you're trying to solve me." "Maybe I am." "Don't." He said it lightly, but there was iron underneath. "There's nothing to solve, Elena. What you see is what there is. A man who does bad things to worse people. Don't go looking for the boy who used to be underneath. He died a long time ago. Did he? She said. Because Sophia told me you pay for her granddaughter's school, and Tomas told me you covered his sister's surgery. And I've watched you not sleep for 3 nights straight because you're afraid Rossi's people are going to hurt me, a nurse you kissed by accident. She leaned forward. That doesn't sound like a man with nothing underneath. That sounds like a man who's terrified of what's underneath. Adrian set down his fork. For a long moment he didn't speak, and Elena thought she'd pushed too far. Then he said very quietly, I had a brother. Elena went still. His name was Danny. He was 17. Adrian's voice was flat, the way people's voices went flat around wounds too deep to touch. He got sick. The kind of sick that money fixes. We didn't have money. So I carried him to 3 hospitals in one night, and at every one somebody looked at our clothes and looked at the space where an insurance card should be, and they turned us away. He wasn't looking at her anymore. He was looking at something 19 years gone. He died in a hallway, on the floor, waiting for someone to decide he was worth helping. And nobody did. Elena's hand came up to her mouth. So don't tell me about the boy underneath, Adrian said. The boy underneath watched his brother die on a hospital floor because they were poor. The boy underneath swore he'd never be powerless again. And every terrible thing I've done, every man I've hurt, every ounce of fear I've built this life on, it all comes from that hallway. From that boy. So yeah, Elena, he's still down there, and he's the most dangerous thing about me. The silence was total. And Elena, who had watched people die on hospital floors, who had held the hands of the ones the system decided weren't worth saving, who had spent her whole career fighting a machine that measured lives in dollars, Elena understood him in that moment more completely than she'd understood anyone in her life. I've watched it happen, she whispered. What happened to Danny? I've watched it happen more times than I can count. People turned away because they didn't have the right card. Kids. Old people. Good people. Her eyes were wet. I became a nurse because I couldn't stand it. You became this because you couldn't stand it either. We just went opposite directions from the same door. Adrian looked at her, then really looked at her, and something in his face broke open. I've never told anyone that, he said. About Danny. In 19 years. Then I'm honored you told me. Don't be. His voice roughened. It means I'm in more trouble than I thought. And Elena understood what he meant, and her heart did something dangerous, and neither of them said another word for the rest of the meal. That night, everything changed. It started with a phone call. Marco's voice tight through Adrian's study door. Boss, you need to hear this, now. Elena, unable to sleep, had come downstairs for water, and she froze in the hallway as the study door opened and Marco's voice carried out. We found the leak, Marco said. You're not gonna like it. Say it. It's Polly. A silence so cold, Elena felt it from the hallway. Polly, Adrian repeated. He's been feeding Rossi's people for 3 months. Movement schedules meeting spots. That's how they set up the alley. That's how they knew you'd be there. Marco's voice dropped. And boss, he's the one who told Rossi about the hospital. He heard you tell me to find a nurse named Elena at Cook County. He passed it up the chain the same night. Elena's blood ran cold. Polly. She'd met Polly. A friendly, round-faced man who'd smiled at her and offered her coffee her second morning in the house. She'd actually thought at least there's one kind face here. Where is he now? Adrian said, and his voice was so quiet it was worse than shouting. Downstairs. We're holding him. He doesn't know we know. Bring him to the cellar. Boss? Bring him to the cellar, Marco. Elena pressed herself against the wall as Marco strode past, and then she did something she would question for the rest of her life. She followed the sound of them down a set of stairs she hadn't known existed into a part of the house she was never meant to see, and she stopped at the bottom, hidden in shadow, and she watched. They had Polly in a chair. His hands were bound. His round face was slick with sweat, and when he saw Adrian come down the stairs, he started to babble. Adrian, boss, whatever they told you, it's a lie. I swear on my mother I would never. 3 months, Adrian said. He didn't raise his voice. He never raised his voice. That was the terrifying thing. 3 months, Polly. Schedules. Meeting spots. You put me in that alley. You handed me to Rossi's shooters like a gift. No boss, no. And then, Adrian said, and now he was close, so close. You heard me ask Marco to find a nurse, a woman who saved my life, and you gave her name and her workplace to the people trying to kill me. You painted a target on an innocent woman. Why? Polly was crying now. They have my daughter. Adrian, they have my daughter. Rossi's people. They took her. They said if I didn't, they said they'd... He broke down completely. I didn't have a choice. I swear to God, I didn't have a choice. And Elena in the shadows watched Adrian Moretti go absolutely still. She watched a man who killed the way other people signed checks stand over a traitor who'd painted a target on her back, and she watched something happen in his face that she never expected. He hesitated. Your daughter, Adrian said slowly. How old? 9. She's 9. Boss, please. The gun was already in Adrian's hand. Elena hadn't even seen him draw it, and she watched his knuckle whiten on the grip, and she understood that in the world she'd fallen into, this was how it ended. That a man who'd betrayed him, who'd nearly gotten her killed, was about to die on a cellar floor, and that afterward Adrian would go upstairs and not sleep, and stand at a window looking alone. And before she could stop herself, before she even knew she was going to do it, Elena stepped out of the shadows and said, Don't. Everyone turned. Marco reached for his own weapon on instinct. Adrian's head snapped toward her, and for one raw second she saw everything cross his face. Shock, fury, and underneath it, horror that she was here, that she was seeing this, that she was seeing him. Elena, he said, and his voice was terrible. Go upstairs. Now. No. This is not your world. Go upstairs. His daughter is 9 years old, Elena said, and her voice shook, but she didn't move. You said it yourself, Adrian. You watched a boy die because nobody cared enough to help. And now you're going to kill a father in front of you because he tried to save his little girl. She took a step closer, past every instinct screaming at her to run. You're not Rossi. You keep telling me you're a monster, so prove me wrong, or prove yourself right. But do it knowing exactly what you're doing. The cellar was silent, except for Polly's ragged sobbing. Adrian's hand did not lower, but it did not fire either. He nearly got you killed, Adrian said, and his voice was barely a voice at all. Do you understand that the name he gave them? The hospital. If Rossi had moved faster, you'd be dead. He put you in the ground, Elena. Him. This man. I know. Then why are you standing between us? Because you told me a boy died on a hospital floor and it made you into this. Tears were running down her face now, and she didn't care. And I don't want to watch this house make a 9-year-old girl into the next you. That's why. Because I've seen what it does, Adrian. I've seen what it does to the ones left behind. And I can't watch you do it. I can't. For a long, long moment nobody moved. Then Adrian lowered the gun. The whole room seemed to exhale. Marco, he said, and his voice had changed, gone cold and precise and terrifyingly focused. Where are they holding the girl? Polly's head came up. What? Your daughter. Where? They never told me exactly. They send proof. Then we find out. Adrian holstered the weapon. Because here's what's going to happen, Polly. You're going to keep talking to Rossi's people. You're going to feed them exactly what I tell you to feed them. And while they think they're using you against me, we're going to find your daughter, and we're going to bring her home. His eyes went flat and dangerous. And then when she's safe, you and I are going to have a conversation about loyalty. But your girl comes first. She always should have. You should have come to me the day they took her. Polly was staring at him like he'd grown wings. You'd help me, after what I did. I'm not helping you, Adrian said. I'm helping a 9-year-old who didn't do anything except be born to a coward. He turned to go, then stopped, and without looking at Elena, he said, Untie him, feed him, And somebody find out everything we can about where Rossi's keeping children. Because if there's one, there are more. He walked up the stairs and did not look back. Elena followed him. She caught him in the hallway at the top. Adrian, don't. He rounded on her, and for the first time she saw him truly shaken. Don't thank me, and don't tell me I did the right thing, and don't look at me like that. You have no idea what you just did. You stopped me from nothing. His voice cracked. You made me feel something in a cellar in front of my men in the one place I can never afford to feel anything. Do you understand? I've spent 19 years making sure nobody could reach me down there. And you walked into the one room in this house where I'm supposed to be a monster, and you made me a person again in front of the people whose lives depend on me being a monster. He dragged a hand down his face. You're going to get us both killed, Elena. Not on purpose, just by being exactly what you are. She stared at him. And what am I? She whispered. Adrian looked at her for a long, aching moment. You're the first good thing that's walked into my life in 19 years, he said. And I don't have the first idea how to protect something good. All I know how to protect are secrets and territory and money. Not... His voice broke. Not this. And then he did the thing neither of them had done since the alley. He reached out and he touched her face just for a second, his thumb against her cheek brushing away a tear she hadn't known was still falling. And Elena stopped breathing, and Adrian stopped breathing. And for one suspended moment, 19 years of ice and 19 years of loneliness stood in a hallway and looked at each other with nothing left to hide behind. Then he dropped his hand. Go to bed, he said quietly. You're safe tonight. I promise you that. Go to bed. She went, but she didn't sleep, and neither did he. And in two separate rooms at two ends of the same silent house, a Mafia boss and a poor nurse lay awake and understood each of them, alone, that something had happened tonight that could never be taken back. Elena kept her promise to Rosa. Every day she called. And it was on the fourth call that Rosa's voice came through wrong. Elena, somebody came looking for you today. Elena's grip tightened on the phone. Who? A woman, real polished. Expensive coat, expensive everything. Said she was a lawyer. Said there was money and inheritance. Some aunt you never met. And she just needed to confirm your address to release the funds. Rosa's voice dropped. Elena, I've been a nurse 30 years. I know a liar when one smiles at me. That woman wasn't any lawyer. She had eyes like a snake. And when I told her I didn't know where you were, she smiled and said, and I'm quoting her exact words, that's all right. I'll find her. I always find what belongs to Adrian. The phone nearly slipped out of Elena's hand. What did she look like? Elena whispered. Beautiful. Cold. Dark hair, maybe 50, but fighting it. And expensive honey, like money that's been money a long time. Elena knew somehow before she even asked. Did she give a name? Romano? Rosa said. Victoria Romano. Elena hung up and ran. She found Adrian in his study, and she didn't knock, and the words came out of her in a rush. A woman came to my hospital today, pretending to be a lawyer. She threatened my friend. She said... Elena's voice shook. She said she always finds what belongs to you. Her name is Victoria Romano. Adrian was on his feet before she finished the sentence. Say that again. Victoria Romano. She was at my... When? His face had gone white under his control. When was she there? This afternoon. Rosa just called me. Adrian was already moving, already snapping orders into a phone, already becoming the thing he became when the world caught fire. But Elena grabbed his arm. Adrian, who is she? You went white. In all of this guns, and Rossi, and men in your cellar, I've never seen you scared. Who is Victoria Romano? He stopped, and when he turned to face her, his voice was hollow. She's the reason Danny died, he said. Elena's breath caught. 19 years ago, my family owed money to the Romanos. Old debt before I was anyone. When Danny got sick, I went to Victoria's father. I begged him. I said I'd do anything, work it off, anything, just help me get my brother into a hospital that would treat him. His hands had curled into fists. And Victoria, she was young then, but she was already what she is now. Victoria looked at me, at a 19-year-old kid holding his dying brother, and she smiled and she told her father, "Let the boy learn what it costs to be nothing." Elena's hand flew to her mouth. They turned me away, same as the hospitals. And Danny died. Adrian's voice was shaking now, 19 years of it pouring out. I built everything, all of it, the whole empire. I built it to be bigger than the Romanos, to make them fear me, to make sure no one could ever say that word to me again. Nothing. He looked at her, and his eyes were wet, and it wrecked her. And now she's back. And she's decided the way to finish me isn't with a bullet. It's to find the one person I've let myself care about in 19 years and take her away, so I have to live the rest of my life knowing I couldn't protect her either. His voice broke completely. She wants me to watch you die in a hallway, Elena. Just like Danny. She wants to close the circle. The room spun. Elena understood all at once the full shape of the trap she was standing in. She wasn't collateral. She wasn't an accident. From the moment that kiss happened in the alley, maybe from before it, she'd been the bait in a snare set 19 years ago by a woman who'd been patient enough to wait half a lifetime for revenge. "The alley," Elena whispered. "It wasn't random. Rossi didn't just happen to chase you past me. No, they wanted me there. They put me there. So you'd—" Her voice failed. "So you'd do exactly what you did. So you'd protect me. So I'd become—" She couldn't finish it. "A weakness," Adrian said. "Yes. You were never supposed to be anything but a weapon they could turn against me." His jaw tightened. "And the sickest part, Elena, the part that keeps me awake, is that it worked. It worked perfectly. Because I do care whether you live or die. She read me better than I read myself. She knew that if she put one decent person in front of me, one person who reminded me of everything I lost, I wouldn't be able to walk away." Elena stared at him, this dangerous, broken man who'd been played like an instrument by a woman he hated, and she felt something she couldn't name rise up in her chest. "Then we don't play the game," she said. "What? She wants you to break. She wants me dead in a hallway so you spend your life in pieces, so we don't give it to her." Elena's voice was steadying now, hardening the same steel that had faced him down in the alley and in the cellar. "You spent 19 years being what she made you, a monster she could predict. Fine, then be something she can't predict. Be smarter than her hate, because I did not survive being poor and orphaned and forgotten just to die in a hallway to make some rich woman feel powerful." Adrian looked at her like she was the first light he'd seen in a very long time. "You're not afraid," he said. "I'm terrified," Elena said. "I'm just done letting people like her decide what my life is worth." She lifted her chin. "So, you want to protect me? Stop trying to lock me in a beautiful room. Let me help you beat her. Because I know something Victoria Romano doesn't." "What's that?" "She thinks I'm your weakness." Elena met his eyes unflinching. "She has no idea I might be the only thing that makes you strong enough to stop her." And in the silence that followed, Adrian Moretti, the most feared man in Chicago, the boy who'd carried his brother through the rain, the monster Victoria Romano had built and now meant to destroy, looked at Elena Marquez and finally understood the thing he'd been afraid to name since the moment their lips met in the dark. He would burn the whole city down before he let her die. And exactly that was what Victoria was counting on. The phone in his hand buzzed. A message. No name. Just an address and a photograph. A photograph of Rosa unconscious, tied to a chair, with a note pinned to her chest that read, "Send the nurse to me, or your last friend dies in a hallway." You remember how that feels. V. Adrian's blood turned to ice, and across the room, Elena saw his face and knew before he said a single word that Victoria Romano had just stopped playing games, and that everything from here was going to cost blood. Elena saw the photograph, and the world stopped. "Rosa," she breathed. "That's Rosa. She has Rosa." Her hands were shaking so hard she couldn't take the phone from him. "Adrian, that's my best friend. She has nothing to do with any of this. She's just a nurse. She's got grandkids. I know." Adrian's voice was low and terrible. "I know. We have to get her. We have to go right now. Elena, stop." He caught her by the shoulders. "Look at me. This is exactly what Victoria wants. She wants you frantic. She wants you to run to that address and hand yourself over, because the second you do, she's got you, and Rosa dies anyway." His grip tightened. "This is a trap built inside a trap, and if we walk into it the way she's drawn it, we both lose everything." Elena's chest heaved. "Then what do we do? Because I am not leaving Rosa to die because I was too smart to save her. Do you understand me? She's the only family I have left. If she dies in a hallway because of me, I will never." "She's not going to die." Adrian said it with such flat certainty that it stopped Elena cold. "Nobody dies in a hallway tonight. Not on my watch. Not ever again." Something moved behind his eyes, 19 years of it. "I promise you that, and I have never in my life made a promise I intended to break." He let her go and turned to the room, and the change in him was total. The man who'd touched her face in the hallway was gone. What stood in his place was the thing that had built an empire out of grief, cold, exact, unstoppable. Marco. Marco was already in the doorway. I saw it. The address is a warehouse on the south side. Romano property off the books. We've had eyes on it before. How many men can she have there? 10, maybe 15. But boss, it's a kill box. One way in that we can see, and she'll have the sight lines. She's not hiding it because she wants you to come. She's daring you. Then we don't come the way she's daring us. Adrian was already moving, pulling a case from behind a false panel in the study wall, and Elena watched aside of him. She'd only glimpsed come fully into the light. "Polly." Polly appeared pale, his hands no longer bound. "Boss, you're going to call your handler, the one who's been feeding Rossi. You're going to tell them the nurse panicked and ran, that she's coming to the warehouse alone on foot, scared out of her mind in the next hour." Adrian's eyes were flat. "Sell it. Your daughter's life is riding on how well you sell it. Make Victoria believe Elena's walking into her hands exactly the way she planned." "And is she?" Polly asked, glancing at Elena. "No," Adrian said. "She's not going anywhere near that warehouse." "What?" Elena stepped forward. "No, Adrian, if I don't show Rosa. If you show, you both die, and I lose the one card Victoria doesn't know I'm holding." He looked at her, and for a second the coldness cracked. "You have to trust me. I know that's the hardest thing in the world for you. I know you've never had a single reason to trust a man in your whole life. But I am asking you for Rosa, for both of you. Trust me for 1 hour." Elena stared at him. Every instinct she'd built over 26 years of being let down screamed at her to run to the warehouse, to handle it herself, to trust no one. But she looked at his face, and she thought of the cellar, and the money for medicine, and the boy who died in a hallway, and she made a choice that terrified her more than any gun. "1 hour," she whispered. "If Rosa dies, Adrian, I will never forgive you. Not ever." "If Rosa dies," Adrian said, "I won't ask you to." Tarsha. The plan came together in 20 minutes, and it was the kind of plan only a man who'd spent 19 years thinking 3 moves ahead of death could have built. Victoria expected Elena to come alone through the front, so Adrian gave her exactly that, or the appearance of it. One of the household women, close enough to Elena's build in Elena's coat, would approach the warehouse on foot, slow and frightened, drawing every eye and every gun to the front. While Adrian and Marco, and 4 of his best, came through a service tunnel Marco had mapped years ago, the kind of forgotten access no one thinks to watch. "You're using a decoy," Elena said, and her stomach turned. "You're sending a woman to walk into Victoria's guns. She'll turn back the moment she draws their attention. She's done this before. She knows exactly how far to go. Adrian checked the weapon in his hands with the ease of long practice. Nobody I send is going to die tonight, Elena. That's not the kind of man I'm choosing to be right now. You should know that about me before this is over. Before what's over? He didn't answer. He was already pulling on a coat, already becoming a shadow. You're staying here, he said, with 2 men on this room and 2 on the grounds. You do not leave. No matter what you hear, no matter how long we're gone, you do not leave this house. Because the one thing that ends this the way Victoria wants is you out there unprotected. Promise me. Adrian, promise me, Elena. I promise, she said. And she hated the words even as she said them, because promising to sit still while people risked their lives for her friend went against every fiber of who she was. But I want your promise back. You bring Rosa home, and you come home too. Her voice cracked on the last part, and she hadn't meant it to. You don't get to be noble and die out there and leave me with all of this. You come home. Adrian went still, and then very quietly, he crossed the room, and he took her face in both his hands, and he pressed his forehead to hers. Not a kiss. Something more careful than a kiss. Something that felt like a vow. I've spent 19 years not caring whether I came home, he said. You just gave me a reason to. Don't ever forgive me for how much that terrifies me. Then he was gone, and the house went silent. And Elena Marquez sat down in the middle of a room full of guards and waited to find out whether the 2 people she loved most in the world were going to survive the night. The warehouse was a trap, and Adrian walked into it knowing exactly how the jaws were set. Marco led them through the service tunnel, 6 of them moving in the dark without a sound, and above them, Adrian could hear it beginning a shout. Footsteps. Victoria's men reacting to the sight of a frightened woman in Elena's coat approaching the front, just as he'd planned. Every gun in the building turning the wrong way. 2 on the catwalk. Marco breathed, easing open a grate. 3 on the floor. Victoria'll be in the office back left glass so she can watch. Rossi with her. Rosa. Center of the floor, chair. They've got her out in the open on purpose. She's the bait boss. The second we move, they'll have a gun on her. Adrian's jaw tightened. Then we move faster than they can pull a trigger. What happened next happened in 90 seconds. And Elena would only ever hear it secondhand in pieces and never fully understand the violence of it. Adrian's men came up out of the floor like the building itself had turned on Victoria's people. The 2 on the catwalk went down before they knew the tunnel existed. The 3 on the floor turned toward the front, toward the decoy, and by the time they understood their mistake, it was already too late. And Adrian went straight for Rosa. He reached her chair as the first real shot cracked through the warehouse, and he put his own body between her and the office glass, and he cut her hands free with a knife, and said the only words that mattered. Elena sent me. Stay down. You're going home to your grandkids tonight. Rosa, half-conscious, terrified, looked up at the face of the most dangerous man in Chicago, crouched over her like a shield, and whispered, Elena, is she? She's safe. She's waiting for you. Stay down. And then the office door opened, and Victoria Romano stepped out onto the mezzanine, and the whole warehouse went quiet. She was exactly as Rosa had described. Beautiful, cold, dressed in money so old it had forgotten it was money. She looked down at the ruin of her ambush. Her men, down her trap, sprung backward, and she did not look afraid. She looked delighted. Adrian Moretti, she said, and her voice carried like a blade. 19 years and you still come running when someone rings the bell. Some things never change. Let her go, Victoria. Adrian rose slowly, keeping himself between the office and Rosa. This woman isn't part of anything. She's a nurse. She takes care of sick people for a living. You want me? I'm right here. I've always been right here. Oh, I don't want you. Victoria smiled, and it was the smile of a woman who'd waited half her life for this exact moment. I want you to feel something. Just once. The way I made you feel 19 years ago when you were on your knees in my father's parlor, with your dead brother's blood still on your shirt begging. She descended a step. Do you remember what I said to you? Let the boy learn what it costs to be nothing. Do you remember? I remember, Adrian said. You built all of this to prove me wrong. She gestured at him at the empire he represented with something like contempt. The fear, the territory, the whole kingdom of it. All to prove you weren't nothing. And here's the joke, Adrian. The beautiful joke I've been savoring for a year. Her eyes glittered. You still are. Because I found the one thing that can bring you to your knees again, and it wasn't a gun. It was a nurse. A poor, nothing nurse exactly like your poor, nothing brother. And the second I dangled her in front of you, you fell into the oldest trap there is. You cared. She spread her hands. You're still that boy in the parlor. You always were. And now I get to watch you lose someone in a hallway all over again. Adrian looked at her for a long moment. And then he did something Victoria did not expect. He smiled. You're right, he said. I am still that boy. I've spent 19 years pretending I wasn't, and you know what? You're the one who finally showed me the truth. So thank you. He took a step forward, and there was something in his face that made even Victoria go still. But you got one thing wrong, Victoria. You've had it wrong for 19 years. You think caring is a weakness. You think the boy who begged for his brother was nothing. His voice dropped. That boy carried his dying brother through the rain to 3 hospitals because he refused to give up. That boy loved something more than his own life, and you sat in a warm parlor and watched a child die for sport, and you called me the nothing. He shook his head slowly. You've had it backwards this whole time. The boy who begged wasn't weak. He was the strongest thing in that room. You just couldn't recognize strength because you've never felt anything in your life worth begging for. Victoria's smile flickered. Big words, she said, recovering from a man about to lose everything. She lifted her hand, and Bruno Rossi stepped up beside her gun, already drawn, aimed down at Rosa. The nurse. Your nurse, the real one. She's out front, my men have her by now. And this one? She nodded at Rosa. This one dies first, so your precious Elena arrives just in time to watch. Just like Danny. A hallway, a body, and you powerless. Again. No, Adrian said. No. Your men out front are holding a housekeeper in a borrowed coat. Elena's not here. Elena's 100 blocks away with 4 of my best men and a locked door between her and you. She was never coming, Victoria. I made sure of it the second you sent that photograph. He let it land. You built a trap for a woman who isn't in the building. And while you were watching the front door, I already have the only hostage that matters. He didn't move, but his voice turned to iron. Rosa's free. My men have your exits. And you've got 1 gun and 1 enforcer against 6 of mine in a building you thought you controlled 10 minutes ago. So here's your choice, Victoria. You can walk out of here. Or you can find out what happens when the boy you called nothing stops caring about walking out himself. For the first time, something crossed Victoria Romano's face that had never been there before. Doubt. And in that half-second of doubt, Bruno Rossi made the decision for her. He swung the gun off Rosa and onto Adrian and fired. At the house, Elena heard the phone ring, and she nearly dropped it, lunging for it. Marco, is that you? What's happening? Silence. Breathing. Then a voice that was not Marco's smooth female amused. Hello, Elena. Elena's blood turned to ice. You don't know me, Victoria said. But I've known about you for a very long time. Longer than you've known about Adrian, in fact. I'm the one who put you in that alley. I'm the one who arranged for your whole life to fall apart the moment you touched him. A pause. And I'm calling because your clever boss made a mistake. He kept you home. He thought that made you safe. Her voice sharpened. It doesn't. Because I still have your friend. And I still have men. And now I know exactly where you are. A locked room, a handful of guards, a house full of exits. Adrian thinks I can't reach. You should ask yourself, Elena. If Adrian's at my warehouse right now, where are the men who aren't? The line went dead. Elena stood frozen, the phone against her ear. Her mind racing, And then she heard it. Downstairs. A crash. A shout cut short. The guards outside her door drew their weapons, and one of them shoved her back from the door. "Stay behind me. Both of you cover the—" The door blew open. What followed Elena would never be able to describe afterward. She only knew that Victoria had lied to Adrian too, that the warehouse was the decoy, and the real strike had always been here at the house at Elena the moment Adrian was drawn away. A trap, inside a trap, inside a trap. And Victoria had been 3 moves ahead of even Adrian, because Victoria had had 19 years to learn exactly how his mind worked. The guards fought. One went down. And then a hand closed around Elena's arm and yanked her toward the shattered door, and she was screaming, fighting, clawing, and a familiar scarred face leaned close to hers. Bruno Rossi. "Miss Romano's been very patient," he said. "Time to go meet her." At the warehouse, Adrian was on the floor. Rossi's bullet had caught him high in the chest, not the heart, but close enough. Marco was over him, pressing down hard, roaring for the men, and Adrian was fighting to stay conscious, and above him, the mezzanine was empty. Victoria was gone. Boss, stay with me. You're okay. It went through. You're okay." "Rosa?" Adrian gasped. "She's safe. We've got her. She's safe." "No, Marco." Adrian grabbed his lapel with a bloody hand, and the horror in his eyes cut through everything. "Victoria's gone. Rossi's gone. They didn't run. Don't you understand they left? Why would they leave? This was the trap this was supposed to be." And then he understood, and it was worse than the bullet. "Elena," he breathed. "The house. It was never the warehouse. It was never Rosa. It was always—" He tried to rise, and Marco held him down. Get off me, Marco. They're at the house. They've gone for Elena. I sent everyone here." "Boss, you'll bleed out." "Then I bleed out in the car." Adrian's face was gray, his shirt soaked through, but his eyes were burning. "She's alone, Marco. I told her to trust me. I told her I'd protect her. I told her nobody dies in a hallway on my watch, and I sent every man I have to the wrong building." His voice broke. "Get me to the house. Now. If I have to crawl there over your body, I am getting to that house." They got him to the car, and as it tore through the dark toward the house, Adrian Moretti pressed his hand to a hole in his own chest and actually prayed for the first time since he was 19 years old, kneeling in a warm parlor, that he was wrong. He wasn't wrong. Elena came back to herself in the back of a car, her hands bound her head, aching, Bruno Rossi's bulk beside her, and Victoria Romano's voice from the front seat. "There she is." Victoria turned, and her smile was the most frightening thing Elena had ever seen, not because it was cruel, but because it was satisfied, the smile of a woman who'd finally, after 19 years, gotten exactly what she wanted. The famous nurse, the weakness. "You have no idea what you are, do you? You think you're a person. You're not. You're a lesson. You're the last chapter of a story I started teaching Adrian Moretti 2 decades ago." "You're insane," Elena said. Her voice shook, but she made herself say it. "You've spent 19 years hunting a man over what? Over a debt. Over a boy who was already dying. Over insolence," Victoria said. And for just a second, the mask slipped, and something raw and ugly showed underneath. "That boy knelt in my father's house and looked at me like I was the monster. Like he was better than us. A nothing, a nobody, holding his dying brother. And he had the audacity to look at me with contempt." Her hands tightened on the seat. "I have spent 19 years making sure that boy learned his place. And you're the final lesson. Because when he finds your body, and he will find it, I'll make sure of that. He'll finally understand what I've always known. That caring is the thing that destroys you. That the moment he let himself love something, he handed me the knife." She smiled again, composed once more. "You should thank me, really. You get to be the most important thing that ever happened to him. Right at the very end." Elena looked at this woman. This beautiful, hollow, poisoned woman who'd built a life around a 19-year-old grudge, and something strange happened. She stopped being afraid. "You're wrong," Elena said quietly. Am I? You think you taught Adrian that caring destroys you, but you didn't teach him anything. You just hurt a kid so badly, he spent 19 years believing your lie. Elena leaned forward against her bindings, and her voice was steady, now steady as it had been in the alley, steady as it had been in the cellar. But he stopped believing it. I watched him stop. In a cellar a few nights ago, he had a gun on a man who betrayed him, a man who nearly got me killed, and he put it down. Because that man had a daughter. Because Adrian remembered finally that a boy in a hallway matters. Her eyes locked on Victoria's. You didn't win 19 years ago. You just delayed it. Because the boy you tried to break grew up to be a man who left money for medicine and cut a stranger free from a chair tonight and put his own body in front of the bullet. That's not a man you broke, Victoria. That's a man you couldn't break. And it's killing you. For a moment, Victoria Romano said nothing. And then softly she said, Bruno, when we get there, kill her slowly. The car drove on into the dark, and Elena closed her eyes and thought of a man with a hole in his shoulder telling her to trust him, and she held on to that thought like it was the only warm thing left in the world. Come home, she thought. You promised. Come home. They took her to a house on the water. Victoria's house all glass and cold light, and they put her in a chair, and Bruno Rossi stood over her cleaning blood off his knuckles. And Victoria poured herself a drink, like a woman with all the time in the world. He'll come, you know, Victoria said almost conversationally. That's the beautiful part. He always comes. 19 years and he never learned. He'll come through that door bleeding. Bruno tells me he was shot. Did you know that? Shot in the chest protecting your friend, and he'll come here anyway, because he can't help himself, because I built him to come. She sipped her drink. And I'll let him watch. That's all I want, really. I want him to watch you die knowing he couldn't stop it. And then I'll let him live. That's my gift. I'll let him live with it forever the way I've made sure he lived with Danny forever. She smiled. Living is so much worse than dying when you've lost the only thing you loved. I'd know. Would you? Elena asked. Her wrists were raw from the bindings, but her voice was calm. What did you lose, Victoria? What made you like this? Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Surprise that the woman she was about to kill had asked her a real question. That's not your concern, she said. You've spent 19 years teaching a man about pain, Elena said. Somebody taught it to you first. That's how it works. Nobody's born this empty. Somebody carved it into you, and instead of healing it, you've spent your whole life carving it into other people. Elena held her gaze unafraid. I've watched a lot of people die, Victoria. I've held their hands at the end. And you know what? Nobody has ever said not once in their last moment. Nobody has ever said, I wish I'd hurt more people. Nobody. Not one. They say the names of the people they loved, every single time. Even the ones who spent their whole lives pretending they didn't love anyone. Victoria's hand tightened on her glass. You'll say a name too at the end, Elena said gently. We all do. I wonder whose it'll be. For one long, suspended moment, something cracked in Victoria Romano's face. Something old and buried and unbearable. And Elena saw, just for a heartbeat, the person underneath the poison. Then Victoria set down her glass, and the mask slammed back into place, and she said, Bruno, now. And Bruno Rossi raised the gun. The door came off its hinges. Not the front door. The wall of glass exploding inward, and through it came Adrian Moretti, gray as death, one side of his shirt black with blood, moving on nothing but Will and Marco, and 4 men behind him, and the room erupted. Bruno spun toward the noise. The gun swung off Elena, and Adrian bleeding dying, running on the last of everything he had put himself between Bruno Rossi and Elena for the second time that night, and this time he did not miss. Bruno Rossi went down, and then it was just the 3 of them in the wreckage. Adrian on his knees, now unable to stay standing, his hand still holding the weapon. Elena bound to a chair with tears streaming down her face, and Victoria Romano backed against the window, her men dead or fleeing her 19-year masterpiece collapsing around her in real time. "Adrian," Elena sobbed. "Adrian, oh God, you're bleeding, I'm here." His voice was barely there. He crawled to her, and with hands slick with his own blood, he worked at the ropes on her wrists. "I'm here. I'm sorry. I got it wrong. I sent everyone to the warehouse, and I got it wrong, and I almost lost you. His hands were shaking too hard to work the knots. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Stop apologizing and let me help you." Her hands came free and immediately went to his chest, to the wound pressing down the way she'd pressed down in an alley a lifetime ago. "You stupid man, you're shot through the chest, and you drove here. Hold still. Let me, Marco. I need pressure. I need something clean now." And above them, forgotten for a moment, Victoria Romano reached into her coat and pulled out a small silver gun and pointed it at the two of them on the floor, the bleeding king and the nurse trying to save him. "No," she said, and her voice was shaking now, cracked and wild, 19 years of control finally splintering. "No, this is not how it ends. He watches. He watches. That's the entire—" "Victoria." Adrian looked up at her, and even now, even dying, his voice was steady. "It's over. Your men are gone. Rossi's down. You've got one bullet and a room full of my people. Put it down." "I've got one bullet," Victoria said, and something terrible came into her eyes, "and I only ever needed one." And she turned the gun from Adrian. She pointed it at Elena. Elena froze her hands, still pressed to Adrian's chest, and in that frozen half-second, every person in the room understood that there was no time, no distance, nothing between the barrel and Elena's heart, but empty air. And Adrian Moretti, who could not stand, who was bleeding out on a stranger's floor, who had spent 19 years being the monster Victoria built. Adrian did the one thing she never in all her careful planning accounted for. He did not reach for his gun. He reached for Elena. And he pulled her down and covered her body with his own broken one, and the shot rang out. The silence after was the loudest thing Elena had ever heard. She lay pinned beneath him, his blood soaking into her, and for one horrifying eternity, she couldn't tell if the warmth spreading between them was a new wound or the old one. Couldn't tell if he was shielding her or dying on her. Couldn't tell anything except that he was heavy and still, and she was screaming his name into his shoulder. "Adrian! Adrian! No, Marco!" And then above them both, a sound that stopped Elena's heart. A body hitting the floor. She looked up. Victoria Romano lay crumpled by the window, the silver gun fallen from her hand, and standing over her, swaying one hand pressed to a wound of his own, was Polly. Polly, who was never supposed to be here. Polly, who Adrian had sent to sell a lie on the phone. Polly, who had followed the cars into the dark because a nurse had once stood in a cellar and refused to let him die, and because a man he'd betrayed had promised to bring his daughter home. She was gonna... Polly's voice shook. She was gonna shoot the nurse. I couldn't I couldn't let her. He slid down the wall, clutching his side. You brought my girl into this world of yours, and you still said you'd get her back. Nobody ever kept a promise to me before. He looked at Adrian, at Elena, at the blood. So I kept one, for once. I kept one. And underneath, Adrian Moretti stirred. He was alive. The shot had missed, driven wide, when Polly's bullet took Victoria in the same half-second, and the blood between them was the old wound, the chest wound, and it was bad. It was so bad, but he was breathing. He was breathing, and Elena pressed her forehead to his, and sobbed with a relief so total it felt like drowning. You covered me, she wept. You're shot through the chest, and you covered me with your body. You absolute, why would you? You could have died. You almost... I told you. Adrian whispered, his voice a thread, his eyes finding hers. Nobody dies in a hallway on my watch. Not Danny, not Rosa. His bloody hand found her face. Not you. Never you. And across the room, Victoria Romano. The woman who'd spent 19 years building a lesson out of a dead boy, lay dying on the floor of her own glass house, and with the last of everything she had, she turned her head and she looked at the two of them tangled together on the ground, the nurse cradling the bleeding king, and something moved across her ruined face that no one who'd ever met her would have believed possible. It was recognition. Elena had asked her whose name she'd say at the end. And Victoria Romano's lips moved, and the name she said was not Adrian's, and it was not her father's. It was a name none of them had ever heard, small and soft and unbearably young. The name, perhaps, of whatever had been carved out of her 19 years before she ever learned to carve it into anyone else. Then she was gone, and in the silence of that terrible room, Marco's men moved in, and hands lifted Adrian onto anything flat they could find, and Elena would not let go of him, would not stop pressing on the wound, screaming instructions, becoming in that moment the only thing she had ever truly been. Not a weakness, not a weapon, not a lesson, but a nurse fighting with everything she had to keep one more person from dying on the floor. "Stay with me," she commanded as they carried him into the dark. "You hear me, Adrian Moretti? You promised me you'd come home. This is not you coming home. Stay with me. Stay." And somewhere, very far away in the gray place between living and dying, a man who had spent 19 years believing love was a weakness, heard a poor nurse ordering him to live, and for her he tried. They wouldn't let her into the operating room. Elena had spent her whole adult life on the other side of that door, the one giving orders, the one with her hands inside the wound, the one deciding who lived. And now she stood in a private clinic. Adrian's money had bought silence from her scrubs, soaked in his blood, and two men held her back from the doors, while strangers cut into the only person in the world who mattered to her. "Let me in there," she was saying to Marco, to anyone. "I'm a trauma nurse. I've done 1,000 of these. I can help. Let me help." "You can't help him in there." Marco's voice was rough, and she realized he was terrified too, this hard man who'd been at Adrian's side for 15 years. "You help him by being alive when he wakes up. That's the only thing that'll matter to him. You being alive." He guided her to a chair. "Sit. Please. You've got his blood all over you, and you haven't stopped moving in 6 hours. Sit down before you fall down." She sat, because her legs gave out mostly. And then she waited. There is a particular kind of waiting that nurses know better than anyone. The waiting on the wrong side of the door. The waiting where all your skill is useless, where the person you love is reduced to a set of numbers on a monitor you can't see. Elena had watched families do this for years. She had brought them coffee and bad news and sometimes miracles. She had never once until tonight understood what it actually felt like. It felt like drowning very slowly in a room full of air. "He's strong," Marco said, sitting beside her. "You don't build what he built by being easy to kill." "He drove across the city with a hole in his chest, Marco." Her voice was hollow. "He covered my body with his. He's not strong. He's reckless. Why did he do that? Why would he do that for me? I'm nobody. I'm a nurse. He kissed in an alley by accident." Marco was quiet for a moment. "You want to know the truth?" he said finally. "In 15 years, I never once saw Adrian Moretti afraid to die. Not once. Man walked into rooms that would have made grown killers wet themselves, and he never blinked because, and I never understood this till tonight, because some part of him didn't care if he made it out. Ever since the brother. He's been half a ghost for 19 years, Elena, going through the motions, building the empire, but dead inside where it counts." He looked at her. "And then you show up, and 3 nights ago I watch him put a gun down in a cellar because you asked him to. And tonight, I watch him climb into a car he should have died in because he'd rather bleed out getting to you than live one more minute not knowing if you were safe." Marco shook his head slowly. "You didn't ruin his life, whatever he told you. You gave it back to him. You're the first thing that man's been afraid to lose in 19 years. That's not nobody. That's everything." Elena put her face in her bloody hands and wept. Rosa found her there an hour later. Elena heard the footsteps and looked up, and there was her friend, bruised, shaken, a bandage on her temple, but alive, being helped down the hall by one of Adrian's men. Elena was out of the chair and across the room before she knew she'd moved, and the two women collided and held on to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. "You're okay," Elena kept saying. "You're okay, you're okay, oh my God. Rosa, I thought she said she was going to. I thought I got you killed." "You didn't get me killed." Rosa pulled back and held Elena's face in both hands the way she'd done 100 times over 11 years. "A man came for me, cut me loose, put his own body between me and a gun, and told me his name was Adrian and that you sent him." Her eyes searched Elena's. "That's him, isn't it? That's the one you've been hiding. That's why you called me every day terrified. That's the man they're cutting open behind that door." "Yes." "The Mafia one." "Yes, Rosa." Rosa looked at her for a long, long moment. 30 years of nursing, 11 years of friendship, a lifetime of reading people in their worst moments. "You love him," Rosa said. It wasn't a question, and Elena didn't try to make it one. "I don't know how it happened," Elena whispered. "I don't know when. He's a criminal. Rosa, he's done terrible things I've seen. I know exactly what he is, and I love him anyway, and I don't know what that makes me. It makes you human." Rosa pulled her back into her arms. "Loving someone doesn't mean you're blind to what they are. It means you see all of it, and you stay anyway. And honey, a man who bleeds across a whole city and takes a bullet meant for you. Whatever else he is, he's a man who loves you back. And I've buried 2 husbands who never once looked at me the way you're describing." She stroked Elena's hair. "Don't you dare apologize for being loved like that. You've been alone your whole life. You deserve one person who'd die for you, even if the packaging's a little terrifying." And Elena laughed a broken, wet, exhausted laugh for the first time in what felt like 100 years. The surgeon came out at dawn. Elena was on her feet before the doors finished swinging, reading his face the way she'd read 1,000 surgeons' faces, and what she saw there let her breathe for the first time in 10 hours. "He's alive," the surgeon said. "The bullet nicked the lung and lodged near the pericardium a centimeter over, and we'd be having a very different conversation. He lost an enormous amount of blood. Frankly, the fact that he was conscious and moving after that first injury shouldn't be medically possible." He shook his head. "But he's stable. He's going to be in a lot of pain for a long time, and recovery will be slow, but he'll live. Whatever's keeping that man going, it's stronger than his injuries." Elena knew what was keeping him going. She'd ordered him to. "Can I see him?" "He's not awake yet, but yes, family can sit with him." "I'm not family," Elena said automatically, the old reflex, the lifelong habit of being nobodies, of belonging to no one. Marco stepped up beside her. "She's family," he told the surgeon flatly. "She's the only family he's got. Let her in." Adrian woke to the sound of a monitor and the feeling of a hand in his. He didn't open his eyes right away. The pain arrived first, a deep tearing ache in his chest that told him distantly that he was alive because the dead don't hurt. And then, over the pain, over the beeping, came a voice. Low. Exhausted. Talking to him in the dark. "And if you die on me now, after all of that, after I dragged you back across an entire city, I will never forgive you. I mean it. I have forgiven a lot of people for a lot of things in my life, but I will not forgive that. So you don't get to. You hear me? You don't get to die now that it's over. That's the deal. Those are the rules." He knew that voice. He'd have known it anywhere. Adrian opened his eyes. Elena was slumped in a chair pulled close to the bed, still in bloody scrubs, her hair a disaster. Dark circles under her eyes, holding his hand in both of hers and scolding him while he was unconscious. And she was without question the most beautiful thing he had ever seen in his life. "Bossy," he rasped. "Even now." Elena's head snapped up. For a second she just stared at him like she couldn't believe he was real. And then her whole face crumpled, and she made a sound that was half laugh and half sob, and she pressed his hand to her cheek. "You're awake," she breathed. "You're awake. Oh my God, don't you ever—" "Rosa," he said. It was the first word he wanted. Is she? She's fine. She's safe. She's down the hall arguing with your men about whether she's allowed to make coffee. Elena laughed through her tears. You saved her, Adrian. You were bleeding to death, and you cut her loose and shielded her with your own body, and you saved her. She wants to meet you properly. When you're not, you know, full of holes. Good. His eyes drifted closed, then opened again, fighting to stay with her. Victoria. Elena went still. She's dead, she said quietly. Polly, he followed us. When she turned the gun on me, he shot her. He saved my life. The man who betrayed you. Her voice was soft with wonder. He said nobody ever kept a promise to him before, and you did, so he kept one. For once. Something moved across Adrian's face. Grief and relief, and something too complicated to name. His daughter, he said. We have to... Marco's already on it. He's got everyone he can spare finding out where Rossi's people were holding her. Polly's in the next room. They patched him up. He took a bullet too from one of Victoria's men, but he'll make it. Elena squeezed his hand. You did that. You turned a man who painted a target on my back into the man who saved my life just by keeping one promise to him. That's who you are, Adrian. That's what you actually are underneath all of it. I wish you could see yourself the way I... She stopped. Adrian's eyes held hers. The way you what? He said. And Elena, exhausted, wrung out past every wall she'd ever built, looked at the man in the bed, the Mafia boss, the killer, the boy who'd carried his brother through the rain, the monster who left money for medicine. And she said the thing she'd been running from since an alley in the rain. The way I love you, she whispered. You idiot. The way I love you. The monitor beeped in the silence, and Adrian Moretti, who had spent 19 years certain that love was the weakness that got people killed, looked at the woman who had just walked into a warehouse and a glass house and the valley of the shadow of death for him. And he understood finally completely that he'd had it backwards his whole life. Love wasn't the weakness. Love was the only thing that had ever made him strong. Say it again, he rasped. I love you. Again. Elena laughed, wet and helpless. I love you, Adrian. I love you. Now stop making me repeat it and rest. You're going to tear your stitches. He lifted his hand. It cost him. She could see it cost him. And he touched her face the way he had in the hallway a lifetime ago, his thumb against her cheek. 19 years. He said, his voice breaking. I thought the boy who begged in that parlor was the weakest thing about me, something to bury, something to be ashamed of. His eyes were wet. You made me love him. You stood in a car with a gun to your head, and you told Victoria that boy was the strongest thing in the room, and you were right, and I didn't believe it until you said it. You gave me back my own brother, Elena. You gave me back the person I was before her. A tear slid down into his hair. I don't know how to be a good man. I've been the other thing too long. But I want to try. For the first time in my life, I want to try. If you'll... I'll help you, Elena said fiercely. I'll help you try. Every single day. I didn't fall in love with the man you were pretending to be, Adrian. I fell in love with the one you kept hidden. And I'm not going anywhere until the whole world sees him too. And in a small clinic room, as the sun came up over a city that had feared Adrian Moretti for 2 decades, the most dangerous man in Chicago held the hand of a poor nurse and cried not for what he'd lost, but for the first time in 19 years for what he'd found. But it was not over. Because empires do not simply stop when their king lies bleeding in a bed. And there were men who had watched Adrian Moretti fall, and men who had heard that Victoria Romano was dead, and men who did the math and came up with a single dangerous answer. The throne was weak, and a weak throne is an invitation. Marco brought the news 3 days later when Adrian was strong enough to sit up and furious enough to want to leave. We got a problem, boss. Marco's face was grim. Word's out. You're hurt. Victoria's gone, half her territory's up for grabs, and half of it wants yours. The other families are circling. There's talk that Adrian Moretti's gone soft. That he abandoned a war to sit at a nurse's bedside. that the man who ran this city for 15 years is finished. He hesitated. And there's a meeting called Thursday. The heads of the 5 families. They want to see you. They want to see if there's still a king or if it's open season. Elena, standing by the window, felt her stomach drop. He can't, she said. He can barely stand. He's got a hole in his chest 3 days old. He is not walking into a room full of men who want him dead to prove he's still no. Absolutely not. Elena, Adrian started. No, I just got you back. I am not handing you over to a room full of killers so you can bleed out proving a point. If I don't go, Adrian said quietly, they come here. They come for the territory. And they come for me while I'm weak, and they come for you. Marco's right. In this world, weakness isn't a state, it's a scent. And right now, I reek of it. He met her eyes. The only way to protect you, the only way to protect everyone under my roof, is to walk into that room and remind 5 very dangerous men why they've been afraid of me for 15 years. You'll die. Maybe. He said it gently. But if I hide, we all die slower. This is the world I built, Elena. I built it out of that hallway, out of Danny, out of never wanting to be powerless again. And now it's the thing keeping you alive, and it's the thing that might get you killed all at once. His jaw set. I have to go. But he stopped, and Elena watched something shift in his face. Something she'd seen the first hints of in a cellar, in a hallway, in a hospital bed. A decision forming. A man reaching the end of one life and the edge of another. But this is the last time, Adrian said. Marco went very still. Boss, I'm going to walk into that room Thursday, Adrian said slowly, and I'm going to remind them exactly who I am, and then I'm going to give it all away. He looked at Marco, at the man who'd stood beside him for 15 years. I'm out, Marco. After this. The territory, the empire, all of it. I'm going to divide it, sell it, walk away from it, whatever it takes. Because I finally figured out the thing Victoria never could. His hand found Elena's. The empire was never the point. I built it to stop being powerless. And I've been the most powerful man in this city for 15 years. And I've never been more powerless than I was 3 nights ago watching a woman I love get dragged out of my house because of the world I built. His voice hardened with resolve. I don't want to be powerful anymore. I want to be free, and I can't be free with a crown on. The room was silent. Marco looked at his boss for a long moment, and Elena braced for anger, for argument, for a loyal man watching his life's work dissolve. Instead, Marco's hard face did something she'd never seen it do. It softened. You know? Marco said quietly. 15 years I followed you, and I never once told you why. He swallowed. You don't remember, but the night your brother died I was there. Kid on the corner. Nobody. I watched you carry him to those hospitals. I watched them turn you away. And I watched a 19-year-old boy make himself into something terrible, so that would never happen to anybody he loved again. His eyes were bright. I didn't follow you because you were the most dangerous man in Chicago, Adrian. I followed you because I saw the boy in that hallway, and I always knew, that under all of it, you were the only man in this city worth following. Marco's voice roughened. So if you want out, if you finally found the thing that lets the boy rest, then I'll walk you into that room Thursday, and I'll walk you back out, and I'll help you give it all away, and it'll be the proudest thing I ever did. Adrian stared at him. 15 years, and he hadn't known. Marco, don't. Marco cleared his throat hard. Don't make it weird. Just don't die Thursday. That's all. Let's get you out clean. Thursday came too fast. Elena helped him dress because he couldn't lift his arm without the wound screaming, and neither of them said much because there wasn't much to say that wouldn't make it harder. She buttoned his shirt over the bandage. She straightened his collar. Her hands were shaking. You come back, she said finally, not looking up from his collar. "That's the whole deal. That's all I need. You walk into that room, you do your terrifying thing, and you walk back out and you come home to me. Because we had a deal, Adrian, in the hallway before all of this. You promised you'd come home. And you almost broke it once, and I am not surviving you breaking it twice." "Elena." He caught her hands, stilled them against his chest. "Look at me." She looked at him. 19 years ago, I walked into a room full of powerful people, and I begged, and they said no, and my brother died. His voice was low and certain. Today I'm walking into a room full of powerful people, and I'm not going to beg. I'm going to walk in as the most dangerous man they've ever known, and I'm going to walk out as a free one. And then I'm going to come home to you, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that the boy in that hallway was worth saving. He pressed her hands harder against his chest, against the heartbeat under the wound. I have a reason to come home now. I didn't for 19 years. Now I do. That changes everything, Elena. A man with something to come home to fights differently than a man with nothing. He fights smarter. He fights to live. He kissed her forehead. I'm coming home. Believe it. And Elena, who had spent her whole life learning not to believe anyone, believed him. What happened in that room, Elena would only ever hear about afterward in Marco's low voice over coffee she couldn't drink. Adrian Moretti walked into a meeting of the 5 families, pale and wounded, and moving carefully, and every man in that room saw the injury, and every man in that room made the same fatal assumption. Victoria had made that a wounded king is a weak one. They were wrong, because Adrian didn't come to that room to fight for his throne. He came to give it away, and there is nothing in the world more dangerous than a man who has stopped wanting the thing everyone else is willing to kill for. I know why you called this, Adrian told them, standing when he should have been sitting, bleeding when he should have been resting, meeting 5 pairs of predator's eyes without a flicker. You think I'm finished. You smell blood, and you called me here to watch me either fight or fold. So let me save us all the theater. He set both hands on the table. I'm not fighting you for my territory. Silence. Confusion. The scent of a trap they couldn't see. I'm giving it to you, Adrian said. And in the stunned quiet that followed, he laid it out, the whole thing clean and cold and precise. The territories divided fairly among them, an end to the war before it started, the Romano holdings distributed to keep the peace, everything they'd come ready to spill blood for, handed across the table like a man setting down a weight he'd carried too long. Why? One of them finally demanded. What's the play? Nobody walks away. There's no walking away. There is, Adrian said. I'm doing it, right now. Watch me. He straightened, and even wounded, even giving it all away, the force of him filled the room. But understand something before I go. I'm walking away because I choose to, not because you made me. And if any one of you mistakes my leaving for weakness, if any one of you touches the people I'm walking away to, I will come back. And I will not come back as a man who wants a throne. I'll come back as a man with nothing left to lose and no reason left to be merciful. And you have all known me long enough to know exactly what that looks like. His eyes moved slowly around the table, and one by one, 5 of the most dangerous men in Chicago looked away. Leave me my peace, and you can have my kingdom. That's the last deal I'll ever offer any of you. I'd take it. They took it. Because they had every one of them spent 15 years being afraid of Adrian Moretti, and a man willing to give away everything he'd built is a man who has found something he values more, and there is nothing on earth more terrifying to men who value only power than an enemy who has stopped wanting it. Adrian Moretti walked into that room a king, and he walked out a free man. He came home. Elena was waiting at the window. She'd been at the window for 6 hours, and when the car pulled up and the door opened and he stepped out alive, upright, walking slow but walking home, she was out the door and down the steps before Marco could even help him. She stopped just short of throwing herself at him, remembering the wound at the last second, and instead she took his face in her hands and pressed her forehead to his, the way he'd done to her before the warehouse, the vow they kept making to each other without words. "You came home," she whispered. "I told you I would." "You did. You actually did." She was crying and laughing at once. Is it done? Is it really done?" "It's done." His arms came around her, careful but sure. "It's over, Elena. All of it. Victoria, the family's, the empire, 19 years of it. I gave it away. I'm nobody now." He laughed softly against her hair, and there was something in the laugh she'd never heard before, something light, something young, something free. "The most feared man in Chicago, and I just made myself a nobody. A poor nobody. Just like the nurse I fell in love with in an alley." "You're not a nobody," Elena said fiercely, pulling back to look at him. "You never were. That was always Victoria's lie. You're the man who carried his brother through the rain and never gave up. You're the man who left money for medicine. You're the man who took a bullet for a nurse he barely knew and then gave away a kingdom to keep her safe." She kissed him, soft, careful of his wounds, but real, nothing like the desperate kiss in the alley. Everything the alley kiss had secretly promised. "You're the best man I've ever known, Adrian Moretti. It just took the whole world burning down for you to believe it." And standing in the driveway of a house that no longer had to be a fortress, holding the woman who'd walked through hell at his side, Adrian Moretti finally understood the thing he'd spent his whole life running from. He'd built an empire so he'd never be powerless again. And he'd found at the very end of it that the most powerful thing he'd ever done was set the empire down and choose freely, with nothing left to protect him, to love someone anyway. Behind them, Marco leaned against the car and watched the two of them, and for the first time in 15 years, the hard man let himself smile. The boy in the hallway could rest now. He was finally home. Freedom, it turned out, was harder than war. Adrian Moretti had spent 19 years knowing exactly who he was the moment he woke up each morning. He was the king. The empire ran on his fear, his will, his cold certainty, and every hour of every day had a shape because he gave it one. And now, 6 weeks after he'd handed all of it across a table, he woke up in a house that was no longer a fortress, in a body still healing. And for the first time since he was 19 years old, he had no idea what he was supposed to do. "You're pacing again," Elena said without looking up from the coffee she was pouring. She'd moved into the house properly now. Her few belongings looked almost comical in the vast rooms, a photo of her mother on a shelf that had held nothing for a decade, her cheap sneakers by a door that had only ever known Italian leather. "That's the fourth lap of the kitchen. You're going to wear a track in the floor, and then some very expensive person will have to fix it." "I don't know what to do with my hands," Adrian admitted, and there was something almost boyish in the confusion. For 19 years, every minute was accounted for. There was always a threat, always a move, always someone who needed handling. And now nobody needs handling. Now nobody needs handling. He stopped pacing and looked at her, genuinely lost. "I gave away the only life I knew how to live, Elena, and I'd do it again 100 times to have this, to have you. But I don't know how to just be. I've never done it, not once in my adult life. I don't know how to be a man instead of a weapon." Elena set down the coffee pot. She'd been waiting for this. She'd seen it building for weeks. The restlessness, the way he'd wake at 3 a.m. and stand at the window out of pure habit, watching for enemies who no longer existed. A man doesn't spend 19 years as a blade and then simply learn to be a spoon. She'd nursed enough people through the loss of the thing that defined them, the athlete after the injury, the soldier after the war, the mother after the last child, left to know that Adrian wasn't restless. He was grieving. He was grieving the only version of himself he'd ever known how to be. "Come here," she said. He came. He always came now. The man the whole city had feared crossed a kitchen because a nurse asked him to, and neither of them found it strange anymore. "You asked me once in my apartment what you wanted," Elena said, taking his hands. "You said you didn't know. It scared you more than any gun. Do you remember?" "I remember." "Well, I think it's time you found out." She looked up at him. "Not what the empire needs. Not what keeps you safe. not what stops you from ever being powerless again. Those are all just walls you built around the hole Danny left. Her thumbs moved over his knuckles. I'm asking what you want, Adrian, the boy in the hallway. If nobody could ever hurt you again, and nobody can, it's over. You're free. What would that boy do with his life? What did he want before the world taught him to want power instead? Adrian was quiet for a long time, and when he answered, his voice came out rough, like it was dragging something up from very deep. I wanted to help people like us, he said. That's God, I haven't thought about that in 19 years. Before Danny got sick, before any of it, I used to tell him I was going to be a doctor. Isn't that something? Me. A doctor. He laughed, but it caught in his throat. I wanted to be the person who didn't turn people away. The one who looked at a poor kid holding his dying brother and said, yes, bring him in, we'll help. I wanted to be the opposite of every door that closed in my face. His eyes were wet now. And then Danny died, and I decided the only way to matter was to be feared. I got it exactly backwards. I spent 19 years becoming the thing I hated, instead of the thing I wanted to be. Elena's heart broke and mended in the same instant. Then let's build it, she said. Adrian blinked. Build what? The thing you wanted. She was gripping his hands hard now, and her voice was rising with something that had been growing in her for weeks. You have money, Adrian. Not empire money, clean money. The money you kept when you gave the rest away. And I have 26 years of watching people die on the wrong side of a locked door because they couldn't pay. You wanted to be the door that opens. I've spent my whole life screaming at the doors that stay shut. Her eyes were blazing now. So let's build a door that never closes. A clinic. A real one in the neighborhoods. Everyone else forgot where nobody gets turned away because they don't have the right card. Where no kid ever dies in a hallway again because his family was poor. Her voice broke. We can't save Danny, but we could save the next Danny, and the one after that, for the rest of our lives. Adrian stared at her, and Elena watched something happen in his face that she had never seen in all their weeks together. Not in the alley, not in the cellar, not even in the hospital bed when he'd told her he loved her. She watched hope arrive in a man who'd been dead inside for 19 years. You'd do that, he said barely above a whisper. With me. With everything I've knowing what I am. What I did, you'd build something good with me. I don't want to build it with what you were, Elena said. I want to build it with what you are. And what you are, Adrian Moretti, is a man who was always meant to be the door that opens. It just took the whole world burning down for you to find your way back to him. She reached up and touched his face. So, Dr. Moretti, what do you say? You want to spend the rest of your life saying, yes, bring them in, we'll help. And the most feared man in Chicago. The king who gave away his kingdom, the boy who carried his brother through the rain, put his face in his hands and wept. And then he laughed. And then he pulled Elena against his chest, careful of the wound that was finally slowly healing. And he said the truest word he had ever spoken in his life. Yes, he said. God, yes. Bring them in. We'll help. Nothing worth building is built without a fight, and their fight came fast. They found the building an old shuttered clinic in the exact neighborhood Adrian had grown up in, 3 blocks from the apartment where Danny had gotten sick, a fact that stopped Adrian cold when he realized it. But the moment word got out that Adrian Moretti was pouring money into the Old West Side, the vultures came. The first was a city official who arrived, smiling, talking about permits and inspections and the way things get done in this part of town, making it very clear that a great many fees could appear or disappear depending on how generous Adrian felt. The old Adrian would have had a very simple answer for a man like this. Elena watched him war with it, watched the muscle jump in his jaw, watched the cold thing behind his eyes wake up and stretch. And she put her hand on his arm. Adrian, she said quietly. Not that way. Not anymore. He looked at her. And then he looked at the smiling official. You're going to approve every permit, Adrian said, and his voice was perfectly calm. Not because I threatened you. I'm not going to threaten you. Those days are behind me. You're going to approve them because this clinic is going to treat your constituents' children for free. And because when it opens, I'm going to stand in front of every camera in this city and name every single person who helped make it happen, and every single person who tried to stop it." He smiled, and it was a new kind of smile, one with no fear in it at all. "I used to buy silence. Now I'm going to buy sunlight, so you decide which side of the photograph you want to be on." The permits came through in a week. The second fight was harder because it came from his own past. A former associate, a man who'd worked the edges of Adrian's empire, who'd expected to inherit territory and instead watched Adrian give it all away, showed up one night with 2 men and a grievance cornering Adrian outside the half-finished clinic. "You made us all look like fools," the man snarled. "Adrian Moretti gone soft over a nurse. You had everything. You had the whole city on its knees, and you threw it away to play doctor in the slums." He stepped closer. "Some of us don't think you get to just leave. Some of us think you owe—" And Adrian, who 6 weeks ago was still a king, who could have ended this man with a word, did something that shocked everyone, including himself. He didn't reach for a weapon. He reached for the truth. "You're right," Adrian said. "I had everything, the whole city on its knees. And you know what I found out standing on top of all of it?" He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "It was the loneliest, emptiest, most powerless place I've ever been. I had a mansion with no warmth in it. I had men who followed me out of fear. I had a hole in my chest where my brother used to be, and I filled it with territory. And it never, not once, not for one single day in 19 years, made me feel anything but empty." He held the man's eyes. "So take a swing if you have to. I won't stop you. But understand you're not threatening a king anymore. You're threatening a man who has finally, for the first time in his life, got something worth more than power. And there is nothing you can do to me that's worse than the 19 years I already spent being you." The man stared at him, and whatever he saw in Adrian's face, the total absence of fear, the peace of a man who'd already survived the worst thing that could happen to him, it made him lower his fists. "You're really done," the man said, almost wondering. This is real." "It's real." The man looked at the half-built clinic at the sign that would soon hang over the door, and something crossed his own hard face. Something Adrian recognized, because he'd carried it himself for 19 years. The exhaustion underneath the anger. The tiredness of a life built on fear. "My mother," the man said gruffly. "She's sick. The kind that costs money we don't—" He stopped, looked away. "When this place opens, would you—" "Bring her in," Adrian said, and then gently, "We'll help." The man left without another word. But 3 weeks later, his mother was the 4th patient through the clinic doors, and she left with her medicine and her dignity, and it cost her nothing. They opened on a Tuesday. There was no ribbon, no ceremony. Elena had insisted on that. "The people who need this place don't come to ribbon cuttings," she'd said. "They come at 2 a.m. with a sick kid and no options. So we just open the doors. That's the whole statement. The doors are open." And the doors were open. They named it the Daniel Moretti Free Clinic, and above the entrance, Adrian had them carve a single line. Not his name, not a mission statement, just 7 words that meant everything. "No one is turned away. Not ever." The first night, Elena worked the floor the way she'd worked it her whole life, sure and fast and fierce, and Adrian, who'd studied for months, who'd thrown himself into learning the administrative side, the funding, the impossible logistics of keeping a free clinic alive. Adrian stood at the front desk and did the one thing he'd wanted to do since he was 19 years old. He said yes to every frightened parent, to every uninsured worker, to every old person who'd been putting off care because they couldn't afford it, to every single person who came through that door braced to be turned away. Adrian Moretti looked them in the eye and said the words that closed a circle 19 years in the making. "Come in, we'll help." Rosa came to work there. Of course, she'd retired from Cook County the day the clinic opened and shown up the next morning in scrubs, declaring that she wasn't about to let Elena run the place without adult supervision. Marco came too in his way. He ran the security and the supply chain, and to everyone's quiet amazement, turned out to have a gift for calming down frightened children. This enormous, frightening man, folding himself down small to make a crying kid laugh. And Polly came with his daughter. They'd found her. Marco had found her 3 days after the glass house in a Rossi safe house, 2 states away, and he'd brought her home himself. She was 9 years old and quiet and watchful, the way children get when they've seen too much, and Polly had wept when he held her, and Adrian had stood back and watched a father get his daughter back and understood that this was what power was actually for. Polly worked the clinic now. He'd asked Adrian for a job the way a man asks for absolution, and Adrian had given him both. "I don't understand you," Polly said one night, months in as they closed up. "I betrayed you. I painted a target on Elena's back. By every rule of the world we came from, I should be dead. And instead, you gave me a job, you got my daughter back, you." He shook his head. "Why, I keep asking myself why." Adrian was quiet for a moment, wiping down the front desk. "Because a nurse stood in my cellar once," he said finally, "and told me that if I killed a father in front of his daughter, I'd be making the next me. And she was right." He looked at Polly. "The world we came from runs on the idea that some people are disposable, that some lives don't count. It killed my brother. It almost killed Elena. It took your daughter." His jaw tightened. "I spent 19 years being a monster made by that idea, and then I spent one night in a cellar learning I didn't have to be. You had a choice once that wasn't a choice. Save your girl or stay loyal to me. That's not a choice any decent world puts on a man. So no, I'm not going to punish you for it. I'm going to build a world where no man ever gets put in that spot again. One patient at a time." He almost smiled. "That's the only revenge worth having, Polly. Living well, building something good, watching the world that broke you fail to break the people who come after." The years came, and they were good years. The first good years Adrian had known since he was 17. The clinic grew. One location became 2. Became a small network across the neighborhoods the city had forgotten. The money he'd once used to buy fear he now used to buy insulin and antibiotics and prenatal care, and the slow, patient, unglamorous work of keeping poor people alive. He would never undo the things he'd done in his first life. He knew that. He never pretended otherwise. But he'd found at last a way to spend the second life paying down the debt of the first, and it was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. He and Elena married quietly in the clinic itself after hours with Rosa and Marco and Polly's daughter and a handful of the staff as witnesses. Elena wore her mother's necklace and her nurse's shoes, and Adrian wore a smile that no one from his old life would have recognized. And when the officiant asked if he took this woman, the most feared man Chicago had ever known, said yes in the same voice he used at the front desk. Every night, the voice of a man who had finally learned that saying yes to the right things was the only power that had ever mattered. They didn't have an easy life. Free clinics never do. There were funding crises and staffing shortages, and nights when they lost patients they couldn't save. And Adrian learned slowly, painfully, that his new life could break his heart just as thoroughly as his old one. Only now it broke his heart for the right reasons. He learned to grieve properly for the first time. He learned to let Elena hold him when a child came in too late the way he'd once been too late for Danny. He learned that the boy in the hallway hadn't needed to be buried after all. He'd just needed someone to finally say his brother's name out loud and mean it. Years later, on an ordinary evening after the last patient had gone, Adrian and Elena stood outside the clinic beneath the sign that had started it all. No one is turned away. Not ever. And Adrian slipped his arm around his wife and looked at the thing they'd built together and asked her the question he'd been carrying for a very long time. "Do you ever regret it?" His voice was soft. "The alley. That kiss. All of it. I took your quiet life and I set it on fire. I dragged you into a war. I got your friend kidnapped. I nearly got you killed twice over. If I'd never grabbed you in that alley, you'd have had a normal life, a safe one. He looked down at her. Do you regret it? Saving the man you were supposed to be afraid of? Elena was quiet for a moment. She thought of the alley in the rain, of the taste of his blood, and the terror of that first kiss, of the cellar and the warehouse and the glass house and the hospital bed, of 19 years of his pain and a lifetime of her own loneliness, of all the ways it should have destroyed them both, and hadn't. And then she looked up at the man beside her, not the mafia boss, not the monster, not the king, just Adrian, the boy who'd wanted to be a doctor, the man who said yes, bring them in 100 times a night, the husband who still after all these years crossed a room whenever she asked him to. No, she said, and she smiled because she understood finally and completely the truth of everything they'd survived. No, because I didn't save a mafia boss that night. She reached up and laid her palm against his cheek, over the face the whole city had once feared, and now only the sick and the poor and the forgotten ever saw bent over their beds, telling them they mattered. I saved a person, and Adrian Moretti, who had spent 19 years believing he was nothing, who had built an empire to prove it wrong and found only emptiness, who had at last set the whole kingdom down to become the one thing he'd always been meant to be, finally understood what the poor nurse had known all along. A person's past does not have to define their future. The coldest heart alive can still be thawed, and even a man the whole world calls a monster can choose in the end to become the door that never closes, because someone once refused to run from him in an alley in the rain and saw the human being hidden behind all that power and stayed. He was no longer the most feared man in Chicago. He was something far greater. He was a man who had learned to love, and love in the end had saved them both.